A belated good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Live at the Waterhole. My name's Ben Coley. It's a lovely Saturday afternoon, and we have started again at Old Donya Lodge in Kenya. Sorry for the slight delay there. We just had a little technical hiccup, which has been fixed by all the clever people in Johannesburg. So thank you for that, and apologies for the later arrival than planned. But thanks very much for joining us. This is, as I said, of course, Live at the Waterhole in association with Africam. And it seems we've had to go to Okukoyo in Namibia. Looks like we've still got one or two gremlins in the system, but it is of no matter. Um, but we would love to hear from you regardless. If you have any questions and comments, please do send them through. We'll do our best to air them, and I will try my best to answer them, as well as putting in some little tidbits of information and anything else that might pop into my head over the next couple of hours. A very stark difference and contrasting landscapes down in Namibia versus East Africa. You can see how dry it is at Okuku in comparison, very much more subtropical. And there's classic white colours that we associate with the Tosha, and a little bit of that beautiful orange sand contrasted with that lovely blue sky. It looks like we do have a few animals coming down to drink. I'm trying to see what they are. Possibly some warthogs and one or two little antelopes walking around in the background. Lovely to see how that breeze is just causing those ripples to move across the water. Just see that acacia on the left rustling in the wind as well. Now, judging by the way the water is moving, it looks as if the wind is blowing towards the far side of the dam as we're looking at it. And it's not, therefore, uncommon to find most herbivores feeding on the windward side of the dam, if I can say that, because they're in a somewhat prone position there. Um, they're not looking around them for potential predators sneaking up on them. It always makes sense, if you can, to drink downwind so that you can potentially smell anything else. But speaking of the weather, let's go and have a look at the weather forecast in our different locations for today. Right, well, it seems they were zebras and not warthogs. Now we're a little bit closer, but maybe there was a warthog hiding in there somewhere. But as you can see from the weather, much cooler in by African comparisons this time of the year, which is a bit of a respite from those fairly brutal and humid summer conditions. I was out last night doing an astronomy evening, and by about 10 o'clock, and probably by about 9 o'clock, I could clearly see my breath in front of my face. We were down to around about 9, 10 degrees here in the Lowveld, which, as we were saying yesterday, often feels a lot colder than it actually should be. But I was very grateful for my nice warm jacket, certainly last night. But more importantly, it was clear skies, which is one of the reasons it was cooler, of course. We didn't have that blanket of insulation of the cloud cover, and we had beautiful crystal clear views of the night sky last night, and were able to look at a bunch of fabulous celestial phenomena. Nice to see all those zebras melting into the distance, the way they're all walking in single file through the bush. That's one of the reasons that we also walk in single file when we're doing game walks and trails out here. It's how the animals work. Of course, lots of reasons for that. I wouldn't say it's there necessarily to disguise numbers, But it generally means that any problems that are encountered by the first one, and you're not going to have a knock-on effect, or everyone will then learn from the problems that the one in the front has found. So for predators as well, if you're all spread out across the bush, you're far more in danger of being picked off. And certainly it's far less threatening from a perspective when we're walking, to walk in single file than to all walk abreast. But let's head back up to Oldonyo in Kenya and see if our elephant, giraffe, and zebras are still hanging around. My apologies, everybody. We've gone to Tembe, where we do often see elephants. So let's see if I can be vindicated. There we go. There's one. A beautiful sub-adult bull. Definitely has left his natal herd, very often associating with other bulls of his age and above. But definitely not a fully grown bull, not as bulky as some of the larger individuals that we get. And you can see he's got a relatively nice straight back. As they get older, there we go, there's some more. As they get older, that back will start to sink along the spine. One of the many ways we can estimate age of elephants. One on the left having a good splosh around in the mud there, creating some lovely mud with which to coat himself with, protection against the sun and from parasites. Of course, you'll often see animals after they've rolled around in the mud, they will go and have a good scratch against some trees and some rocks just to dislodge any of those ectoparasites which are on the skin. And you'll often find telltale signs of those near waterholes. You'll find polished rocks and polished trunks of trees that become favoured sort of scratching posts and rubbing posts of these animals. There's a nice bigger bull. It's actually quite fun to go and investigate those if you ever get an opportunity to. And in amongst all that sort of caked mud, you'll often find the smeared remains of things like ticks. So these animals use this mud very much like we do an exfoliant. There's little soil grains, acts like little abrasives, and dislodge anything that's attached to the skin. You often see elephants doing it behind their ears. It's an area that they struggle to reach. And despite the incredible thickness of their skin, so a couple of centimeters thick around the ears, around the groin, and around the belly area, the armpits, much thinner skin, and they can be susceptible to ticks. There is an elephant tick. See where this bigger bull came in and everybody parted the ways, rather Red Sea-like, to give him access to this little mud wallow. That big domed forehead. Yeah, I agree. It's so beautiful to see these elephants throwing mud. We were commenting yesterday on just how accurate they are. Very rarely is that mud wasted. I saw one or two just now that must have gone 2 meters above the height of his back that mud was tossed, and probably 80% of it landed exactly where it should be. Many years of experience. So there is something that says to be considered an expert in your field, you have to amass over 10,000 hours worth of experience. But I think this elephant has probably been doing this for many, many years, 30 or 40 years, looking at the size of it. I think that very much considers him an expert knot tosser. Uh, Callie, you're asking about ticks. You can find ticks on an elephant. I've never personally seen one, but they certainly do pick up ticks, not in the same numbers that a lot of the antelope species and other animals do. But it still always amazes me that a tick can penetrate that thick hide, even in the thinner areas of skin. But say certainly around the anus, around the groin, under the armpits, behind the ears, where that skin is much, much thinner, then yes, they do pick up ticks. But I don't think in the massive sort of tick load that we associate with something like a buffalo, or you see on a zebra or a giraffe. So many animals do have specific ticks that infest them. In addition to the more general ones, the bont ticks and the bont-legged ticks, we get more than 100 different species of tick in southern Africa, divided up into two or three families. But the third family, as I understand it, is from just very few cases of one type of tick that I don't think anyone's ever seen alive, just from some dead ones that were found, I think, in Namibia, I think. But you do get an elephant tick, you get a rhinoceros tick, and things like the red-legged tick, they prefer zebras. So there are a bit of species preference as well. I suppose you're asking about elephant skin diseases. Um, Again, I'm not a vet and I don't know for sure, but I don't recall ever seeing an elephant with a skin disease. Occasionally they get abscesses and lesions, which is more from infection if they've been poked by a branch perhaps whilst fleeing through the bush, or been tusked by another elephant, or have some sort of injury that may have got infected. I think they're immune to most of the more common sort of tick-borne diseases that we would associate with domestic livestock and buffalo and giraffe, things like heartwater and corridor disease and all of those other sort of unpleasant tick-borne things. I'm unaware of any specific skin diseases that elephants do pick up, although there are always exceptions to every rule. So I'm sure there have been cases, but it's not a commonly seen occurrence. I've seen thousands and thousands of elephants, and I don't remember seeing one with any specific conditions. I'd say there are three major families of ticks. They've all got their fancy names, of course. You've got the Exodides, which are the most commonly seen ones in the low felts. Those are the ones that you generally will find on you if you're walking through the bush, and that you'll see on animals. Those are called the hard-bodied or the hard-shelled ticks. They come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, and you can differentiate between males and females. The males have a bit more of a sort of a shield extending from their heads across half of their abdomen, where the females are pretty much lacking that shield. And that's because the females have to engorge themselves with blood, particularly when they are gestating eggs. They want that energy and protein from the animal's blood. And a fully engorged tick can swell up to ridiculous proportions. When they have fed enough, those gravid females, gravid meaning pregnant in sort of arthropods, they will drop off, and you can sometimes see them dragging this great big balloon of an abdomen behind them. You can even track a tick, a big engorged tick like that. It leaves a very characteristic track in the soft sand. But what's always amazed me is they have the ability to manipulate their intestines, their stomachs. I'm not quite sure of the correct terminology for a tick. But if they get turned onto their side, they can push all of the blood that they've got in those stomachs to one side to make them rock over until their legs can grasp hold of something to right themselves. And often, when they are moving, looking for a suitable nesting site, I see the females will sort of pull their whole abdomen up towards their heads, so they've almost got like a big humpback to make it easier to walk. So, pretty amazing what ticks can do. And then you get the other main family, which is the Argastidae ticks, which are the softer ticks, so the tampans and things that you find in drier areas. They don't normally attach to animals. They will, if an animal is sedentary somewhere, they will feed and then they will drop off again. So a lot less known or a lot less common to see because they don't live on an animal's body like the hard-bodied ticks do. But they're amazing things, those tampans. They can survive for years. Reports of things of close to a decade that adults can live without feeding. They completely dry up and become stationary and just sit in one place, usually either in the nest of an animal or more often perhaps in the shade of a tree out in the desert. But even if they've been there for years, not moving, conserving energy, and dehydrating themselves, if they so much get a whiff of carbon dioxide or sense the heat of an animal that's maybe going to that shady spot for a lie down, they'll instantly become active and try and feed. So, no, none of us really like ticks, but they are, as with most things in the animal kingdom, incredibly well adapted for their specific lifestyles. The third family of tick, I can never remember the name of it, but it sounds something like Nutella. It's Nutellaidae or something like that. But as I said, it's only really very, very few records. We're talking, I think, single figure records of this tick, which is a sort of a mixture between the two, the hard and the soft bodied ones. So perhaps evolved from the progenitor of those two families. But they do have an amazing ability to track down prey. They have a specialized organ. It's a little slit on their front legs, which is called a Huller's organ. And it acts by picking up a variety of different stimuli. It's sensitive to infrared heat, so the body heat of an animal, to the carbon dioxide emissions, to humidity, and also potentially to vibrations as well. So those hard-bodied ticks or the soft-bodied ticks that are sitting in the leaf litter, if a grazing animal is moving towards them with their nose down to the ground, as they're exhaling, they're putting humid air into the environment and also expelling carbon dioxide. The ticks will pick up on that very, very quickly and make a beeline to where that is coming from. You're right. It's strange that they still mud bath in cold winters, but remember the sun is still potent. The atmospheric temperature is lower because the humidity is lower. But I find I actually burn just as much in the summer as I do in the winter because the lack of humidity. It doesn't block out so many of the UVB rays coming through, and the sun somehow feels hotter. In the summer, the whole air is warmer, but in summer, the sun is hot when you're in it. You can almost feel your skin burning because you haven't got the humidity to moisten the skin. As I said, it's not just mud bathing for protection from the sun, it's also to deal with potential parasites. And to be honest, they like. TK Matt are asking if when the elephants are walking and sometimes occasionally stop and stand still, are they listening or picking up vibrations? We will never know for sure, but I would think so, yes. If you are listening or sensing vibrations through the ground, you don't want to be walking and making your own noise, but like owls having silent flight, if you hunt by sound, you don't want to be making noise yourself. And some of these sounds that they're picking up may be very, very distant and very, very quiet. So absolutely stand still, take stock of the situation, and listen very carefully to those faint signals that are being transmitted from somewhere. There's a beautiful Inyala, female Inyala, just checking it's safe to come down for a drink. Yep, the coast looks clear. Looks like the Inyala's decided maybe not to have a drink. Got a little bit perturbed maybe by that impala. That was possibly what she was looking at, to deciding if the coast was clear, and then had to negotiate this minefield that the elephants have left behind them. And there's a youngster. Hello. And Yawas generally are browsing animals, preferring leaves and twigs and things as opposed to grass. They will take the opportunity to eat grass if they can, but more than likely there'll be some little sort of shrubs, little forbs that are also growing there that she's looking for. Beautiful markings, the stripes and the spots. Stopping and having a listen there again. That's where the elephants went, so maybe she can't see the elephants but can hear something moving in the bushes. Very alert. Look at those ears pointed forward, those radar dishes. But again, note how she stops to listen. So TK Matt, I think that's a little bit more evidence to your suggestion as well, that when the elephants stand still, they're listening. So trying to pick up all of those little subtle signals that are coming. You want as few distractions as possible. And we're exactly the same. If you're walking around and you hear something, more often than not, we will stop and listen and try and figure out A, what it is, B, where it's coming from, and perhaps most importantly, is it potential danger? But I'm sure she can hear those elephants feeding in there, and she's just not sure exactly what's ahead of her. A twitchy right foot going. Possibly trodden on something, maybe got something stuck in between those cloven hooves. Or maybe she's got a little nick down there which is being bothered by little flies and things. Who knows? Maybe she's just doing some tap dancing. She's really unsure of what's in front of her. She hasn't made any decisive movements, still very much analysing the situation. Perhaps that's the reason why she's being very, very cautious, if that's her youngster. See, she's taken that established game path again. Single file animals make these lovely pathways through the bush, which we ourselves follow. Oh, maybe she's waiting for the rest of the group. But that was nice. We don't get an opportunity to view Inyala all that often like that. Jamie, no. They are not only found in KZN, in Yalas, they're found throughout the eastern side of the country. You won't find them in the more arid west because they're generally considered quite riverine animals. So more so in the low veld, but we do see them up here in the Kruger area as well. Most frequently found close to riverbeds, drainage lines, anywhere where there's a little bit more moisture and thicker vegetation. Very often found in lodges. You'll often get inyalas frequenting lodge grounds, and they can become very, very relaxed with people. They've possibly learnt that it's a little bit of a safer environment in there as well. Very normal to see inyalas wandering around the gardens in a lodge environment. And we had some impala, nice opportunity to see the difference between the two. They do confuse some people. Impalas, bushbucks, and yalas, kudus. They're not too dissimilar. But you can see the impala lacking those characteristic white stripes that we saw on the inyala, and they've more got that sort of three-toned coat, white underbelly, cream on the side, and darker orange on the top. You still see looking in very good condition. You see how shiny that coat is in the sun on the right-hand side. There will be some physiological reasons for that. The white underbelly reflects a lot of the heat. Remember, a lot of the heat that we feel on a hot day is actually being radiated off the floor. So white bellies is quite normal, particularly in animals that live in more arid habitats to help reflect that heat. Darker colors on the top to protect the skin from the baking of the sun. And then potentially for an anti-predatory mechanism, it's known as counter shading, so that the darker top half is being illuminated by the sun, the lower part of the animal, which is in shadow, is brightened up by the lighter color, giving it a more uniform um, color as opposed to distinct stripes. Potentially might help it blend into the surroundings a little bit better. Counter shading, something we see in many of the smaller animals, all the way down from sort of the fish eggs, often counter shaded, darker on the top, lighter on the bottom. So any aquatic predators Along the base, we'll be looking up at the brighter water with the sun above it. So it has lighter coloured eggs, and those swimming along the top of the water, looking down towards the darker depths. We'll see the darker colour of the top of the egg, which will potentially give it more camouflage. We can see the same thing in fish in general. Generally, fish are lighter on the bottom half and darker on the top half. A spillage going on from this elephant, but unsurprising. Very nice big water source to choose from. It's a big bull like this, up to 150, maybe even 200 litres of water a day, particularly this time of year when he's not getting so much moisture from the food that he is eating. The leaves, the grass, the twigs, the trees, the cambium, a lot less water this time of year as the trees are also conserving their moisture levels. Bianca, how much water can an elephant suck up its trunk? That's a question I've tried to answer repeatedly. And if you try and do a bit of research, and obviously it's about finding the correct research, but you get lots of different figures. But everything from sort of 5 to up to maybe 12, maybe even 20 litres of water in one trunk load. So I can't give you an accurate figure, unfortunately, because it's not something that I've ever felt confident that I've found the true answer to. But if you watch an elephant, if you give an elephant a bucket of water in one of these more captive situations, it just goes and it's gone. It's like it's been sucked into a black hole, that water. It's incredible how quickly they can suck up that water. Certain sources say they can suck up to 3 litres per second. Impressive. Imagine downing a bottle and a half of a 2 litre soft drink in a second. Some people can do a pint in about 2 seconds. But 3 litres in a second? That's big. So I had a question from Vaughan asking how long elephants can survive without water. Well, they're very similar to us in that regard. We can go about 4 days without water, and elephants are theoretically the same, 3 or 4 days, and they would be really struggling and at major risk of death from dehydration. But remember, elephants have lots of different ways of getting moisture. So, from what they're eating, they can dig for water and find water in areas that we might think were devoid of water. There's our floppy cartilage ear again. Hello. Um, but theoretically, yeah, if you locked them in a concrete room with absolutely no access to water, 3 or 4 days, and that elephant is now in a big danger of succumbing to dehydration. The other thing, of course, the elephant's well known for its pharyngeal pouch, which is a specialized cavity in its throat where it can store water, a few liters of water that can be transported around with them, like wearing one of those little camel packs, I suppose. And I see no reason why they don't drink from that in times of extreme stress. I don't can't say that for sure, but it's definitely been documented that they've sprayed it upon themselves to try and cool off and even to cool down calves in extreme measures. But that ability to sniff out water from kilometers away is vital when you have such high water requirements, as well as the importance of that fantastic memory to learn where the permanent water sources are and where to find water, where to dig to always be able to find some form of water. They can also move massive distances, tens and tens of kilometers in a 24-hour period, migrating between water sources. Edward, yes, good point. What if they suck water up their nose? Don't they cough and choke like we do? I always, if you go upside down in a swimming pool, if you haven't got a nose clip on, or if I always have to exhale because yeah, getting water up your nose is a horrible, horrible sensation. But no, elephants have thought of that. They have evolved a sort of valve at the top of the trunk, which can close off the trunk so that that water doesn't go into the sinus cavities and things. So they don't use their trunk as a straw. They have no way of actually sucking up that water directly into their stomachs through their trunk. And I have no doubt that it would be in gross discomfort. It merely sucks the water up, those valves close, the water is contained within the trunk, and then, as we normally see, the elephant will then either squirt it into his mouth or onto his body, or sometimes at unsuspecting people or animals. Saw one squirt water at Juma waterhole a little while ago at a poor unsuspecting grey heron. But yeah, very important not to get water up there, and it also stops too much dust when they're doing dust bathing, they generally don't suck up the dust into their trunk. They sort of pick it up using those prehensile fingers, if you like, at the end of the trunk. But there'll be lots and lots of dust getting up there, so it's important to have the ability to stop it getting into the nasal cavity. And of course, lots and lots of hairs within that trunk as well, just like we have hairs in our nostrils to try and trap too much dust and foreign objects getting stuck up your nose. There's bigger boulders pushing this one out the way. So thank you very much for creating all of that nice soil. I shall come over and take full advantage of it, and you will be able to do nothing because I'm bigger than you. So of this bachelor group that we are looking at, this one is likely to be the most dominant. He's the big fish in the pond. You can see from the activity of others, they give him space. And very rarely, so does it need to come to aggression. In these older elephants, we see a lot, not a lot more sparring and pushing and shoving between younger bulls as they are developing that hierarchy. But once maturity is reached, there's sort of an unspoken rule. By this point, all these animals know each other relatively well, and they don't need to get involved in fisticuffs. And so you'll often see the more submissive elephants coming up to the bigger ones, just touching trunks to the mouth. We see that quite regularly. The interesting thing is when that youngster or that younger elephant was pushed out of the way by this one, you may have noticed that his penis became visible. It was exposed from the sheath, That is often a sign of anxiety or submissive behavior as well. It's always interesting to watch those little subtle nuances and try and understand these complex relationships that elephants in particular have. Now, time to have a good scratch on the tree. So you're going for that area behind the ears we were talking about. That's potentially where some ticks are able to attach themselves. Very difficult to dislodge from up there. That's terrible, Morgan. I have to share this one with you. I've just been told that that elephant looks rather shady. We'll be talking about trunk calls and things soon. Let's hope we don't have to stoop to those levels. Are we going to have a little bit of impala chasing as a pastime? Let's see. Might be old enough to be able to resist the temptation. Yeah, I think so. That was a lovely sighting. I think it was yesterday. Was it yesterday or the day before? We were at Victoria Falls uh, Lodge there, and we saw that young elephant chasing around the marabou stalks. That was very entertaining to watch. But you see, this one has a little bit more self-control. See the way this elephant keeps resting his trunk there. Often you'll see them draping it over their tusk, but not often you see them when they're drinking to also use that tusk as just something to take the weight. It is a very, very heavy appendage. There we go. Remember, muscle is a heavy thing. It's a heavy object or a heavy substance, and that's a pretty big piece of muscle to carry around with you. Possible for a big adult bull like this, a trunk could weigh up to about 150 kilograms, so that's about 350, 370 pounds or so. Imagine carrying that around on your nose all day, every day. And in fact, the elephant's head in general is a particularly heavy object. Despite that sort of honeycombing of the skull. You've ever seen an elephant skull? There's lots of air pockets within it because otherwise it would just be too heavy to carry around. By the time you've added up the weight of the trunk, the tusks, the skull, the ears, and all that skin, you're looking at close to a ton just in the head of an elephant. The bottom jaw, though, is not honeycombed. The bottom jaw is incredibly heavy. In fact, you could argue that the bottom jaw of an elephant weighs about the same as the entire skull, just because it is a much, much thicker type of bone. Possibly something to do with the fact to house those teeth and the regenerative nature or the way those teeth are um, continuously growing, possibly something to do with that, but also just the massive stresses of chewing all day, every day, and polishing off 200 or 300 kilograms of food on a daily basis. You need pretty strong bones. A little piece of frustration there. Don't know what that was about. Nice little reed bed in this dam here. Be a great place to go and have a look for some frogs in the summer months. Looking forward to doing frogging again when the summer comes. It's one of the highlights for me, and people strangely enjoy frogging. I remember having some guests once in the sands. We'd seen everything. We had some epic sightings, but we went frogging one evening after dark, and the guests all said that was one of their fondest memories of the whole thing, splashing around in the mud there trying to catch frogs. If you are going to catch frogs, though, just as a little piece of, well, not advice so much as a request, remember that the skin of those frogs is very absorbent and susceptible to toxins. That's why frogs are a very good environmental indicator. If you've got bad water and with lots of chemicals and things in it, you won't find any frogs because they are absorbed by the skin, and that frog will probably succumb to those problems. So if you are going to handle frogs, we've got all sorts of horrible oils and chemicals and coming into contact with all sorts of horrible stuff on our hands. So please use gloves, like surgical gloves. And a good way to examine them is actually pop them in a little Ziploc bag, see-through Ziploc bag, and we can have a good look at it. Yeah, that was lovely to watch these interactions between these bulls here at Tenby. Just want to see what happens between this one. I see some tusks sticking out on the right if we're going to get an interaction here. A little bit of a head wave just to say I'm bigger than you. But let's head up to Victoria Falls Lodge up in Zimbabwe, see what's happening up there. Change of scenery. Oh, the sky camera. Don't see this one very often, but this is very nice. You can see some elephants in the background and then all the vultures in the foreground. Very much see that Mopani felt, as we would call it. See those lovely oranges and the yellows. Mopanis go that very vibrant colour in the winter months. Mopani felt in general can be a very homogeneous type of vegetation. We have Mopani belts in Kruger as well, where you get certain areas which are just dominated by the Mopani tree and very little else growing there. It becomes very much the dominant species. I'd say very much favoured by elephants. Those Mopani leaves do carry an awful lot of protein in them, even when they um, drop to the ground. You still find animals feeding on them. Oh, it's interesting. See, one of the things I love about the piney trees is the way that the leaves change during the day. So in the cooler parts of the day, the leaves are wide open, resembling the butterfly, where the name Mopani comes from, African word for butterfly. And then when it's very, very hot, those leaves close up just to try and reduce water loss and reduce exposure to the sunlight. Lots of natural cavities in the piney trees as well. So you'll find a lot of hornbills in this area because there's lots of natural cavities in which the hornbills can nest. Lots of squirrels and other things that like using natural cavities in trees. And we have some other things often associated with Mapanis. Of course, the classic Mapani moth, which is the Mapani worm, which is eaten by many African cultures. Those big, rather colourful caterpillars, which are collected, sometimes eaten raw, but more often dried and sort of crumbled into porridges and other such stuff. If you've never tried a dried Mapani worm, well, you haven't lived. Um, you should experience it once. It's fairly tasteless and dusty. The one time I did pluck up the courage to try one, it's not something I will be looking out for, but is very popular, and it is an excellent source of protein. More protein in a Mapani worm than there is in a piece of red meat of the same size. You also get the Mapani flies, those little actually stingless bees, as the name suggests, often associated with Mapani felt. And only once have I ever found one of the nests. They're tiny, tiny, tiny little things, only probably 2 or 3 millimeters long. They're the ones that buzz around your heads and around your eyes on hot days because they're looking for the moisture that is being secreted. But they also use little holes in trees and they do produce a honey like all bees, which is quite sought after. And if you can find a little hive, if you stick like a grass stem in there and wiggle it around, you might be lucky enough to bring out some sweet honey on the grass there. But often characterized by this little waxy like funnel that just sticks out maybe a centimeter or so from the tree, and that's their entry and exit point. And it's used as a mixture of proteins in their saliva and also resin from the trees, so it's tree sap basically, and they keep a store of it in their nest. And they generally close up all the holes so that just A stops predators getting into those little Mopani bee nests and also controls water loss in these dry, arid areas. I'd love to see these little sort of see-through, waxy tubes, little funnels coming off the side of a tree, but only ever found one once. But they're tiny, you've got to look very close and very hard. The final associated things with Mopani felt is a Mopani psyllid, which is a little type of sort of leaf mining insect, very, very small. and the youngsters or the nymphs will feed on those leaves. And as they do so, they're feeding off that xylem, that sugary water that's been produced after photosynthesis. And the youngsters will actually excrete that and make like a little tent, a little sort of glassy, shimmery dome over them for protection and to stop them from drying out. You'll often find those on the undersides of mapani leaves. And there's some good nutrition to be had in there. And it is sort of sweet. If you find one, you can scrape it off or just pick it off with your fingers and pop it in your mouth, and you can get a little bit of sweetness here. And particularly during the winter months, which is when they're most prevalent, you'll find that browsing animals will often choose the leaves that have a lot of those psyllids on, or those little structures which are called lurps. So you'll find that animals will be attracted to leaves that have multiple Mapani psyllid lurps on them. Beautifully saturated blue water. It looks like a tropical oasis. I thought that looked like a crocodile. Very nice. Got a serious zoom on this camera as well. This croc's done well. He's got his own little private island on that tropical oasis. And doing a little bit of sun basking. And a great egret. So of the white egrets, we get cattle egrets, we get little egrets, we get yellow-legged egrets, and then we get this one, the biggest of the lot, as the name would suggest, the great egret. If that crocodile just suddenly lunged forward and had a go at this egret. Very rarely happens, but crocs will take birds and ground birds very occasionally. Looks as if he might have found something of interest in that reed bed. See, the posture has changed, the way his or her neck is sort of arching forward. Yeah, whatever it was, it's not of interest, but that was a typical sort of strike consideration posture. Well, they do eat mostly small fish, that have been recorded obviously eating amphibians, but also insects, small reptiles, birds, small mammals. So a fairly wide variety of prey. I don't think I've ever seen a great egret actually strike at a prey item and successfully catch it. We normally associate that more with herons. Must be something of interest in there, maybe a little frog moving around or a lizard. Looks like our crocodile has opened its mouth, regulating temperatures, possibly getting a little bit too warm, and just letting some of that breeze go across the membranous surface of the tongue. Generally speaking, when a croc has its mouth open, it's often to cool down as opposed to heat up. That will be done through the body directly. You see those lovely spines on his back called osteoderms, a lot of little blood vessels close to the surface there, which will be absorbing that heat. There is another theory, of course, that crocodiles lie with their mouth open. Yes, potentially to heat up as well, by all means. I'm not saying that isn't the case. But another theory is its ability to possibly sort of cook any bacteria that might be hanging around within the mouth there to just stop bacteria building up in the mouth, particularly when you're eating lots of rotting flesh. It's a good word, that flesh. It's very onomatopoeic. It's a lovely viewpoint in this camera, actually. We don't often look at this one, but look at that just wide open expanse. It gives a far better impression of the wilderness that we are so blessed with out here in southern and eastern Africa. No evidence of people anywhere. The ultimate energy saver, really, a crocodile. Just lie motionless for hours and hours on end, with those muscles like a coiled spring if the need approaches. Of course, one of the ways those jaws will snap shut is there are very, very sensitive receptors, particularly around the snout or the lips, if you will, of that crocodile. You can actually see them if we ever get a chance to look at a mouth really close up. You can see these little black pits, these little black dots along the skin there, and those are sensory receptors that the slightest touch will cause that jaw to slam shut, trapping whatever it may be that is foolish enough to get in the way. So we see similar things in many of the bird species. Often when we see here at Falls the yellow-billed storks probing through the water as opposed to sort of probing at the mud, they're just sort of swiping their heads from left to right with those bills open. And should anything unfortunately or unawarely touch that bill as it's swimming around, it'll just slam shut. Oh, you've got something interesting in the water there, Mr. Egret. Oh, there we go. You got a fish. Don't know what it was, but there we go. I said I haven't really seen an egret striking for anything. Well, I can tick that off my bucket list. Indeed, Carol, a live hunt. I couldn't really see whether it was successful or not, but we definitely saw it strike for something. Might have got a little fish, who knows? Let's assume he did. The more you look at these birds, it's just amazing how it works. I mean, look how long that neck is. You often see them sort of coiled up like a snake. Oh, we're going to go again. When they actually extend it, it's almost comical, isn't it? It's a little pipe cleaner. Of course, birds have that incredible ability to account for refraction. So they have this inbuilt understanding that an object that they see through the water might not actually be in exactly the same place. Just the way the light is bent as different wavelengths travel at different speeds through a substance such as water. You can see that yourself. Um, if you look at a sort of a straw in a glass, the bit of the straw outside the glass goes into the water, and then the rest of the straw looks like it's been sort of shifted slightly from one side to the other. So it's not a perfectly straight line, it's just that refraction. And that's something that all of these animals and birds that have to hunt in the water have to account for, but thankfully their brain does it for them. Really amazing if you consider that birds do not have particularly big brains at all. In fact, they're basically just eyes with a beak, and then there's this tiny little afterthought to put a brain in there. Not the greatest amount of intelligence, although of course you do get very intelligent birds, those that do mimicry and problem-solving intelligence in some of the Corvidae family, like the crows and magpies. One of the birds with the smallest brain in comparison. Whoop. Oh, missed. Good effort. Good effort. One of the birds with one of the smallest brains in comparison to its body size is the owl. Actually, we often have this idea that owls are portrayed as hugely intelligent animals, but they've got very small brains. Their head is all those massive tubular eyes, basically. Very little space left for a brain. Donna Marie, I'm glad you're finding this whole experience extraordinarily beautiful. I couldn't agree with you more. You love Africa. Well, so do I. Donna Marie, so do I. It's a very special place. Comes with its challenges, without doubt, but the diversity of wildlife, the cultural heritage, is like nowhere else on earth. Look at that reflection. Stunning. Looks like a antlion's jaws or a scorpion's pincers. Vicky, you're right. They do have incredible patience, but it's life and death. I've got to wait for the right opportunity. The way they go in such slow motion, they don't want to disturb too much of the water, cause any fish in their path to move out of their way. So you will find in some species when they're doing this, they will purposefully sort of tread at the mud to disturb little arthropods and things under there. And I also saw when I was out in New Zealand, actually, there was something called a South Island robin. Ooh, no, missed again. South Island robins, which on this particular place I went to, just a little tiny island off Stewart Island, so right in the south of South Island, or off the south coast of South Island, is called Ulva Island, and it's a little wildlife sanctuary there. And these little South Island robins, amazing things, they're so relaxed with people because they've never really had any negative experiences that if you sort of scrape your foot in the mud, they will come up and sort of root around to see what you found. And then I was watching one really closely. It was like 2 or 3 inches from my foot, literally. And you could see its foot every now and again would vibrate super, super fast. It looked like a blur. And I think it was probably tippy tapping on the surface there to possibly attract insects to the surface of the soil. But amazing how fast it was. Again, that whole idea of just disturbing the substrate to aid in your hunting technique. It's one of my favourite experiences that day, actually. I shall remember that I've got some videos of it somewhere, this little robin. I think I posted it on my Instagram feed as well, a little video of this robin, pretty much hopping basically in between my legs. Also saw some sea lions that day as well, which was special. And little blue penguins, the smallest of all the penguin species. Obviously decided that a new hunting ground was a good idea. Christian Hall. Watching the egret there reminds you of a karate master. Bruce Lee would be proud. Absolutely. The 2 inch strike of an egret. Lethal. It's a very difficult type of felt to negotiate if you're walking Mopani felt. It's very easy to get turned around in there. A few landmarks, GPSs and compasses, or natural indicators if you can, very important. I've done it myself. I remember doing a walk in one of the reserves here with some students, and I was making a beeline toward the dam, but it was very dry, and we were walking through Mopani thickets like this, and we got to a road, and as we crossed over the road, I saw a whole bunch of footprints. I thought, that's strange, who else would be walking here? And realized inadvertently I'd walked in a complete circle and across the same road that we'd already crossed once already. So it happens to the best of us, but we laughed about it, of course. But you do have to be careful. It was a little reminder to not assume that we know where we're going. We have a tendency to be either left or right foot dominant as well. One of the ways you can test that actually is to blindfold yourself, or do this under supervision with somebody else, please. Although, as funny as it is, it can be a bit dangerous, but have a nice open area. Blindfold yourself and then try and walk in a straight line. And invariably, we will choose to veer off either left or right because we're putting more pressure on either our left leg or our right leg. And once you've established that, you can assume that you're always going to err, even with your eyes open, either to the left or the right, and then you can hopefully counteract that. Marianne van Heerden. I'm glad you're finding it interesting too. Yeah, owls do have small brains. So it's this whole idea of owls being intelligent is very much a television-based idea that we have been given, but very, very small brains in comparison. But more than enough for what they do. Absolutely. Tracy, yeah, pretty much all birds. Well, you're asking if they have the ability to rotate their heads. They have a lot more flexibility in their cervical vertebrae than we do, for example, but owls can rotate their necks further than pretty much everything else, I believe. And that, again, is an adaptation because those eyes are so big and tubular and on the front of their heads, whereas a lot of other prey-based birds, the eyes are on the side of their heads. If you think of something like a dove or the smaller birds, they have a much better field of vision, so they don't need to rotate their heads so much. But an owl can go best part of 270 degrees because its eyes are facing forward and they are so big and tubular in shape that they can't move at all in their eye sockets, that they need the ability to rotate their head completely around in order to potentially see what's behind them. There has been some research carried out as to how an owl is able to turn their neck so far, because you would think it sort of trapped the arteries and cut off blood supply to the brain or cause damage to the arteries. But we now know that um, the sort of air pockets, if you like, the pockets within the vertebrae through which the arteries move is much bigger in an owl than it is in other species, which enables them to turn further without causing problems, basically. And also that the artery actually sort of expands as it goes up to the brain. It gets bigger, whereas in most animals it actually gets smaller and thinner as it approaches the brain to control the blood flow. But in ours, it actually is larger as it gets towards the brain, and it's thought that that is the case when it is turned. If any of that blood is sort of trapped, it has the ability to pool there, and there isn't a sudden lack of oxygen to the brain. I shall have to do a little bit more research in that and remind myself as how that all works. But again, another example of how a group of animals has developed an amazing adaptation to deal with its own requirements. Lisa, I'm glad you're enjoying the view as well. So it is a nice different perspective. We often sort of zoom in close to things like we are on this crocodile or watch the elephants drinking or whatever we're seeing, but it is nice to appreciate the entirety of the vistas sometimes. We do have some incredible areas of natural beauty in Africa. Very primitive and raw, but something very special about it, very connective about it. Oh, bit of a stretch. Not sure what he was doing there. It almost looked like a yawn or a big sort of neck stretch. Eddie, difficult to say how long a crocodile will sit out in the sun for. Oh, there's a nice view of the vulture there. Well, it depends on how hot it is outside. They've got to get up to their sort of certain operating temperature, which I want to say is 38 degrees, if memory serves correctly, or there or thereabouts, to be at prime operating temperature. But if that water is particularly cold, despite the insulation, they might lose that body temperature quite quickly. And they will certainly sometimes sort of overheat themselves on purpose and enjoy it whilst they can and almost sort of keep a reserve of heat. But very difficult to tell you how long they'll stay out there. I was actually thinking it's strange the fact that if he is opening his mouth to create some evaporative cooling effect, then why doesn't he just get into the water to cool down? But they don't really have any sweat glands on their skin, and that skin is quite thick. So it's well insulated, so maybe this is just a far quicker and easier way to regulate temperature rather than also expending the energy of getting in the water and out the water and in the water and out the water. Having said that, maybe he has decided that the evaporative cooling is not working properly and it is time for a dunk. Terrifying things though. It's probably like a 3.5 meter crocodile, disappears into the water and then vanishes with hardly a ripple. Yeah, maybe he did get a little bit too hot and just got in to cool off now. Okay, that was rather nice. I enjoyed that view from Vic Falls Safari Lodge and their sky camera, but we are going to head over to Midway into Tower Lodge. Now, the typical scene at Tau with the ever-present wildebeest, zebra, and this little group of, well, bachelor group of regular visitors here over the last few days. Oh, and some females. That's a female just being overtaken by the zebra there in the background. This waterbuck here in the foreground has got a good idea. Stay in the water, stay where it's cool. Nice, much greener grass than the surrounding area. Of course, they are primarily grazing animals, waterbuck. So it's a nice non-fibrous grasses to be enjoyed growing in the proximity of the water there. Always coming and goings of animals at Tau. Oh, a burst of energy from those zebra, possibly two males having a little bit of a disagreement. Often do get a little bit of infighting between the stallions, particularly stallions which are trying to form their own harem. Just because you become of breeding age, it doesn't mean you automatically get some mares. And remember that whilst they're not territorial, males are territorial over females. And if you want your own females, then you're going to have to steal them from a rival male. And that's it. That's exactly what happens. And obviously, the rival male, the original owner, if I can use the word owner without getting chastised, of those females will be none too happy with this attempt to steal from him. And that's often the cause of many fights and why you see zebras missing tails and things. They can get quite nasty, a lot of biting and nipping and kicking. Christian Hall, I'm glad you're enjoying this. You live in New York City, so yeah, you're very much in the concrete jungle. And the only nature to be found is in the zoo. Well, it's one place to go, but I strongly suggest that you try and visit a place like this. It's southern or eastern Africa. It's a very, very special experience. And don't fear, your feed hasn't frozen. It just seems these three elephants have all run out of batteries. Oh, there we go. Recharged sufficiently. It's such an incredibly special and say connective experience to visit these areas. A lot of people kind of get the wrong idea of a safari and they want to come and they see it as a checklist to tick off all these animals. Must see the big five and I must see a giraffe and a zebra. And of course, you want to see that. That's the reason you're coming. But just remember to take a breath and just enjoy being in amongst everything. Even if you don't see anything, it's still a special place to be and a special experience to be a part of. I think perhaps the best explanation of that I can give you, I heard this story from a friend of mine many years ago who was a guide, or still is a guide, and he once took a guest out on safari who had lost his sight. He was blind, um, and he had to, when they came across any sightings, he had to very much translate what was happening and what was seeing and come up with ways to utilize the senses differently, the smell, the touch, the taste. And he said it was really quite moving to see what this guy got out of the experience, even though he couldn't see it, to just know he was around it and to be a part of it and allow the senses to pick up everything else that was going on. Still a very special and a humbling experience, he said, which I could only imagine. These two ellies on the right are really not doing very much at all. They are proper having a rest, potentially basically having a sleep. Sometimes elephants do sleep standing up, often leaning up against something, but they'll get a couple of hours of sleep every day. They don't need quite as much as we do. Oh, okay, they've decided to have a drink instead. We often get asked whether elephants lie down. Yeah, they do. Not as often, or I should say more often than you might think, but we don't see it happen often. More often than not, it will happen in the middle of the night. You see calves lying down a lot more than adults because they need the rest. They haven't quite got the stamina yet when they're still young. But I have seen on a couple of occasions entire herds lying down. It was a very strange experience. My first thought was some sort of horrific poaching incident, but no, the entire herd of about 15 elephants was just all lying down next to each other. One of the other things a lot of people comment on when they come on safari for the first time, if they are normally living in large population centers and cities, is the quiet. It's almost uncomfortable and alien to some people. We become so accustomed to the noise of traffic and sirens and people and the doof doof of music and all these, even just the sort of the constant hum of electricity. Some people even struggle to sleep out here because they're so used to that white noise that the silence can quite literally be deafening, or people find it a little bit uncomfortable. Going off tangent somewhere, actually, I was recently reading about a special room. I think it was designed by NASA or something to do with one of those large agencies. It's apparently the quietest place in the world. It's a specially designed room. It cost millions of dollars to make, um, but it absorbs all sound. And apparently, many years ago, they put a challenge out that if you could last an hour in there, you would win some amount of money, $10,000 or something ridiculous. And about, I don't know, a few hundred people tried it, and nobody managed to spend 1 hour in this room because the silence was just so uncomfortable. People reported hallucinations, feeling of nausea, panic, fear, all of these emotions. It's interesting to think of how reliant or how used to noise we are. When you get put into a vacuous space where there is no noise, it can have a really weird psychological effect on people. And sometimes the bush can be eerily quiet. Rarely is it eerily quiet in the summer because we've got many more birds, a lot of them are displaying, a lot more insect activities. There'll be the hum of cicadas and various other insects throughout the day. But in the winter, there's a lot less activity, particularly in the insect world. And it is a bit weird. Sometimes you go out and you can just turn off, and if there isn't a breath of wind, and you don't hear a bird, and you don't hear an insect, you don't hear any vegetation rustling, it is a little bit odd. It's a sort of an uneasy feeling. I see this elephant on the left is just rocking slightly, resting one leg. Yeah, proper having a little standing doze, I think. Making me feel a little sleepy as well. I might be tempted by an afternoon nap after watching this. Fortunately, my afternoon will probably be taken up by unpacking, having only recently got back and having worked the last couple of days. Pretty much living out of boxes at the moment. I do need to do some organizing, unfortunately. One of those things that no one really wants to do, but once you get started, it is quite satisfying. See if I can motivate myself sufficiently after watching these sleepy elephants. Leah, any other animals sleep standing up? Certainly some birds do. Things like flamingos and the like, and some of the storks. I'm trying to think of any other mammals that sleep standing up. Even things like rhinos will lie down. Um, from an African perspective, Struggling to think of any others. Remember, a lot of animals, when they are ruminating, are in a almost deep state of sort of relaxation, almost meditative state. But even something like a giraffe, when it is sleeping properly, will lie down. They'll actually tuck their heads around a little bit like a duck. They'll turn their neck right the way around and basically rest their chin on their spines. But no, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I've been quickly sort of rifling through the grey matter of all the different animals that we see out here. I can't think of any others. But if you think about the energy that is expended by an elephant by lying down and standing up again repeatedly, you can almost sort of understand why that is the case. Puma color, you are very welcome. I'm glad you're finding it interesting. It's not been the most, um, what's the word I want? The most exciting episode of Live at the Waterhole today. We haven't had some of the interactions that we've had over the last few days, but it's obviously a nice sedate winter day in Africa, and there's always interesting stuff to be seen and to be had. Little puff of dust on the face, almost like splashing water on your face, trying to wake up. Actually see how much weight is being put onto those front feet. Look at the way that the soles of their feet have expanded under the weight, those big spongy pads. Actually, also recently found out that elephants, many of you may know that they don't walk on the soles of their feet like we do. They're what they're called near ungulates. So that's a spongy pad at the bottom with toes that sort of on an angle that rest on this pad. So they're kind of on their tiptoes or on their last little bit of tarsi of their toes. Apparently, they actually have six toes, not a fifth. And when they're young, it starts off as a sort of a cartilaginous thing, and then it ossifies, it becomes bone, and that's on the back of the foot just to help relieve some of the pressure. Donna Marie, you're very welcome. I'm glad you've enjoyed the show again. Well, as you've said, we try to broaden people's understandings of life on our planet Earth. Absolutely. Understanding nature is very important. We can learn so much from nature, even watching a sleeping elephant, just learning how to relax and take stock, excuse me, of a situation is very important. See those eyes, trying to see whether those eyes are actually closed or if they're just very, very droopy. See that little build-up of white substance at the front of the eye. Elephants don't have tear ducts. That's that lubricating substance for the nictitating membrane, that third eyelid that helps keep the eye clean from dust. Often why you see lots of insects buzzing around the eyes of an elephant trying to get at that moisture. But we are down to the last minute or so of the show, so thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it. Say, not been the most action-packed episode, but we've still seen some lovely things. I certainly enjoyed the egrets, those lovely views at Victoria Falls. Nice dopey elephants as well. We've still seen some good stuff and some interesting interactions down there at Tembe, including our Inyala. Quite enjoyed that as well. But don't forget to do stay tuned. Hear about what's going to happen on the afternoon safaris from Juma and Amakala this afternoon. I'll be back tomorrow at 12:30 Central African time, and I hope you'll be joining me.
Good afternoon, one and all.